The coffee cup slipped from the waitress's hand and shattered across the diner floor, but nobody moved. Not even the jukebox seemed willing to keep playing. Every eye in the crowded roadside diner had turned toward the woman standing frozen beside table 7, her sleeve pulled awkwardly over one arm. The biker at the counter had noticed what everyone else had tried not to see. Beneath the fabric were dark bruises spreading across her wrist and disappearing beneath her uniform. His name was Marcus Hale, and for 20 years, people in the small American town of Red Creek, Ohio, had whispered his name with fear. He was the leader of the Iron Saints, a motorcycle club whose black leather jackets and roaring engines could make an entire street go silent. But on that rainy Tuesday night, Marcus did something nobody expected. He slowly stood from his chair, looked at the bruises on the waitress's arm, and realized that the woman serving coffee to strangers was carrying a secret far heavier than any motorcycle. The waitress was named Grace Whitmore. She was 32 years old, a single mother, and the kind of person who apologized whenever someone else bumped into her. For nearly 2 years, she had worked the night shift at Miller's Diner because the tips helped pay rent for the small apartment she shared with her 8-year-old daughter, Hannah. Grace was known around town for remembering everyone's coffee order and slipping extra pancakes onto the plates of elderly customers who were short on money. She never complained about the exhaustion, never talked about her problems, and always smiled even when her eyes looked tired. That night, however, the smile was gone. Marcus had been sitting at the counter with 3 members of his motorcycle club, drinking coffee after a long ride through the rain. He had barely spoken for 20 minutes. Then Grace reached across the counter to refill his cup, and her sleeve slid upward. Marcus saw the bruises. They weren't the kind someone got from bumping into a door. Finger-shaped marks circled her wrist. There was another bruise near her elbow, and a faint purple shadow beneath the collar of her uniform. Grace immediately pulled the sleeve down and stepped away, but Marcus had already seen enough. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can give someone a second chance, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people who look the toughest are carrying the biggest hearts. Marcus did not confront Grace in front of the customers. He simply finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and walked outside. But he didn't leave town. He stood beneath the diner's awning while rain hammered the pavement and waited. 10 minutes later, Grace stepped out through the back door carrying a garbage bag. She froze when she saw him. Marcus kept several feet between them and gently asked if she was safe. Grace immediately said she was fine. She said she had fallen. She said it was nothing. She said she didn't want trouble. Marcus had heard those words before. Years earlier, his younger brother had been trapped in an abusive relationship, and Marcus had learned that fear could make a person defend the very thing hurting them. He did not push Grace. Instead, he told her that if she ever needed help, she could ask without explaining anything. Then he walked away. The next evening, Grace was back at work. So was Marcus. And the evening after that. For nearly a week, he sat at the same counter, ordered the same black coffee, and said almost nothing. The other bikers followed his lead. They never harassed customers. They never caused trouble. They simply occupied a few tables, creating a quiet presence that Grace seemed to find strangely comforting. Marcus noticed that Grace stopped looking toward the front door every few minutes. He noticed that she began breathing easier. He also noticed something else. A dark blue pickup truck had started appearing across the street shortly before Grace's shift ended. Marcus recognized the truck. Its owner was Travis Cole, a 38-year-old construction supervisor with a reputation for being charming in public and cruel in private. He had been Grace's boyfriend for almost a year. Most people in Red Creek knew they were together, but very few knew what happened behind closed doors. One night, Travis entered the diner. The room seemed to shrink. Grace dropped her eyes immediately. Travis walked toward her with the confidence of someone who believed the entire world belonged to him. He grabbed her arm and told her they were leaving. Marcus saw Grace's face change. She wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was terrified. Marcus stood. So did the rest of the Iron Saints. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus calmly stepped between Travis and Grace and told him to leave her alone. Travis laughed. He looked at the bikers and assumed they were just criminals looking for a fight. He made the mistake of threatening Marcus. But Marcus didn't raise his voice. He simply told Travis that nobody had the right to put their hands on Grace. The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later, but Travis was gone by then. Grace insisted she didn't want to press charges. She was worried about losing her job, losing her apartment, and most of all, what Travis might do if he realized she had asked for help. That night, Marcus made a decision that changed Red Creek forever. He didn't send men to attack Travis. He didn't threaten him. Instead, he went to the town courthouse the following morning. Then he went to a local domestic violence support center. Then he contacted a lawyer. Then he spoke with the sheriff. Marcus used every legitimate resource available to help Grace build a safe way out. He arranged temporary transportation, so she would never have to walk home alone. One of the club members, Patrick, repaired the broken lock on her apartment door. Another member, Robert, helped her move important belongings to a secure location. Marcus paid for the first week at a small family shelter, but he did it anonymously because he didn't want Grace to feel like she owed him anything. For the first time in months, Grace slept without listening for footsteps outside her door. But Travis wasn't finished. A few days later, he showed up at Miller's diner and caused a scene. He accused Grace of destroying his life. He yelled that she belonged to him. He threatened to make sure she never found another job in Red Creek. Everyone inside the diner watched. Then something unexpected happened. The owner, Mrs. Margaret Miller, walked out from behind the counter. She had known Grace for years. She told Travis that Grace worked hard, that she was a good mother, and that nobody owned her. Then the Iron Saints stood behind Margaret. Not aggressively, not looking for violence, just standing together. For the first time, Travis realized he was no longer dealing with a frightened woman standing alone. He left. That should have been the end. But the real surprise came 2 weeks later. Marcus discovered that Grace wasn't the only woman in Red Creek who had been afraid to ask for help. Several local families had quietly experienced domestic violence, financial abuse, or homelessness. People had been suffering behind closed doors because they didn't know where to go. Marcus called a meeting. He invited business owners, church volunteers, social workers, police officers, mechanics, teachers, and ordinary residents. Then he announced something that shocked everyone. He wanted the Iron Saints to help build a community emergency fund. The goal was simple: provide temporary housing, transportation, groceries, legal assistance, and childcare for people escaping dangerous situations. At first, people laughed. They remembered the biker gang from years ago. They remembered the fights, the loud motorcycles, and the rumors. But Marcus didn't argue. He simply showed them what his club had already done. Within 3 months, the town had raised enough money to rent a small building and turn it into a temporary family support center. Grace became one of its volunteers. She wasn't the frightened waitress anymore. She was confident. She spoke to women who reminded her of herself and told them something she wished someone had told her earlier. Being afraid doesn't mean you're weak, and asking for help doesn't mean you've failed. Hannah, her daughter, eventually started calling the bikers Uncle Marcus and the motorcycle uncles. The men who once looked terrifying to strangers became the same men who showed up at Hannah's school fundraiser, fixed bicycles for neighborhood children, and delivered groceries to elderly residents during winter storms. Months later, Grace returned to Miller's diner for the first time on her day off. Marcus was sitting at the counter. She placed a cup of coffee in front of him and smiled. This time, the smile reached her eyes. She thanked him for noticing. Marcus shook his head and told her that she had saved herself. He had only helped hold the door open. Grace looked around the diner. There were families eating breakfast, truck drivers laughing near the window, elderly couples sharing pancakes, children coloring on paper placemats. Nothing looked extraordinary, but to Grace, everything was different, because she was no longer living in fear. And Marcus realized something that morning. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't throwing a punch or starting a fight. Sometimes strength means standing beside someone until they remember how to stand on their own. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not alone, and subscribe for more stories about courage, kindness, and second chances. And before the story ends, I want you to leave one special comment. Kindness is strength. Write those 3 words below if you believe that one person noticing someone else's pain can change an entire life. Years later, people in Red Creek still remembered the night Marcus Hale noticed the bruises on a waitress's arm. They remembered the motorcycles outside the diner, the frightened woman standing behind the counter, and the moment an entire town discovered that the men they had judged by their leather jackets were willing to fight for something far more important than reputation. They were willing to fight for hope. And Grace never forgot the most important part. Marcus didn't save her by becoming her hero. He saved her by reminding her that she deserved to save herself. Sometimes that's what kindness really looks like. It isn't always loud. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply noticing the pain someone else is trying desperately to hide and refusing to look away. That rainy night in Red Creek, one biker saw a bruise. What he did next didn't just change Grace's life. It changed an entire town.